I'm very excited to announce a new webinar coming up at Renegade University. It's a webinar that's been much in demand, actually. It's my introduction to postmodernism. It's called What is Postmodernism? And it'll be taught live November 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses to get more information and to register for the course. There are also a few tickets left for the weekend with me at Renegade University in Los Angeles, November 10th to the 12th. Again, you can go to my site, thaddeusrussell.com/courses for more information and to buy tickets to the weekend. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. This episode is about war. It's about the war between libertarians and conservatives that gave rise to the modern American right. It's about the wars of the United States and about one person devoting much of her life to stopping them. But it's also about wars between children and their parents and between women and men. Above all, I think this episode is about one person's war for her own liberation. I'm honored and tremendously grateful that Angela Keaton talked about many things she's never revealed publicly. They are intensely, painfully personal, but they are at least as important as anything she has said about politics. So I've known Angela Keaton for 8 years, I think, and we've been good friends that whole time. And the thing I need everyone to know right off the bat is that Vladimir Putin hooked us up. Our relationship was brought about because of Mr. Putin. This is true. I first met Angela on the set of an RT show way back then. And we were talking about American imperialism and Antiwar.com, where Angela works. And I was singing the praises of Antiwar.com, rightly so, because as I said then, and I still say now, they are, God, maybe the only dependably anti-war and anti-imperialist organization in this country. I mean, sure, anti-war, there are anti-war organizations that come and go, but if you want to find one that's consistently anti-imperialist and anti-war, I don't know if you'll find one other than Antiwar.com. And I'm talking about from the time Justin Raimondo wrote on September 12th, 2001, that this was dangerous because it was an invitation to go to war, right? When no one was saying that. Not only was no one saying that, people were threatening to kill people who said things like that. From that moment until this, Antiwar.com is it, and Angela has been a central part of that. But anyway, so let me finish. Angela, stop trying to talk. You knew this, right? I don't let women talk on this show?
The best.
Good, okay, good. That's enough out of you. So yeah, we were on the show, and then so I was singing the praises of Antiwar.com, and of course denouncing, both of us, of course, were denouncing U.S. aggression abroad and all that, and it went great, and RT loved me, and that, wanted me back on, and so I said sure, and they brought me back on, and this was about Fox. This was about Fox and Rupert Murdoch and how awful Rupert Murdoch was, and I made an incorrect argument. I said, "Oh, Rupert Murdoch is the one who busted the monopoly, the FCC monopoly, and made it possible to have multiple networks instead of just the big three. And, that's why we have Jon Stewart and Comedy Central and HBO and all the rest of it." And they didn't like that at all. And so guess what? I haven't been on Vladimir Putin's channel ever since. So there you go. But now I do have Angela Keaton as a friend, and she's here. So how's that for an introduction?
That's amazing. I never thought of it that way. That's how we met. Because it's interesting who brings people into your life. One of the most important people intellectually in terms of friendship is Scott Horton, and we were brought together by Alex Jones.
Of course you were. Because there's a vast conspiracy, right? That I think run by Putin. So we get Trump is over here. He's like one wing of it, and Alex Jones is the other wing of it. So, of course, everything that happens that we do is because of them. Yeah.
Exactly. It's
How did Alex Jones bring you together with Scott Horton?
Well, at the turn of the century, I was part of the anarchist scene at that point in Austin, Texas, and Scott Horton and I met through a project called Rebuild the Church. I was screwing around in Spain, not doing what I needed to be doing with my life, and I was traveling with an ex-girlfriend who was an ex-girlfriend at the time, and that was a mistake in many, many ways. And I got an email, and they used to have, remember the email cafes, remember computer cafes, and one of my best friends had said, this is crazy, but they're going to help the surviving Branch Davidians build the church. This would have been 1998 or 99, I think. Yes, and rebuild the church for the surviving Davidians, and it was, ostensibly run by this kooky local menace at our cable access. There's a lot of us used to hang out when we weren't, doing punk rock and being idiots and taking drugs and being just jerks overall. He kind of dominated the Austin cable access scene. But yes, a very loud, angry man named Alex Jones, whom I did get to know a bit. But he was a different person then, and that's a long time ago. But the producer of his then show put together this project where people brought all their skills every Sunday. The Branch Davidians have a Saturday Sabbath, and it was the people who came to build, a lesbian who was a theology professor, a homeless guy who'd been living on the road who ended up being like basically the project manager, constitutionalists, some engineers who just had a really bad attitude about a lot of things. I mean, and then this cab driver, Scott, that I met. And at that time, I was juggling several different jobs, including writing term papers for other people and ghostwriting, and also I eventually ended up becoming station manager of a leftist radio station, which is another weird story. And I also was making money because I had this idea in my head that I needed to write about something other than things that involve, let's say, Waco and police brutality and the horrible oppressions of the government. And when I was young, and this is really horrible, because I was allowed to read whatever I wanted as a little girl, sometimes I wasn't, but that became a whole huge family discussion, debate if that came up. But I was familiar with the works very, very early on of Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon, and this did a lot of damage to my young dyke psyche, which was already, starting to emerge and in different and interesting ways, in ways that, where my family had to take a step back and talk about it. There were some discussions. So because I'd gotten, I was in a perfectly good PhD program, and I decided I needed a life change instead of actually finishing the PhD program. So I was reading some feminist narratives, and I was in somewhat of a complicated place on feminism. And I was reading about this, the topless dancing industry. And I thought, what? I think I might be the kind of person who could rip the lid off of this filth, because how disgusting could that be? I just thought it was just gross. My God, what the hell? Ugh. Filthy shoes near alcohol, and that's where my brain went. Not really even so much nudity, just the whole hygienic aspects of it. So a person who ended up, another man who ended up being a very leftist person in my life, was this old redneck named Tom West, who's long since dead, but he's from Louisiana. And he was the day manager of a club called the Yellow Rose in Austin, Texas. And my hairy-legged butch presentation came in there and basically demanded a job, and said, basically came out as I'm a lesbian feminist academic, and I'm going to, get the facts about this job. And he asked me if I could start today. And I said I couldn't because I had to go remove all the hair off my body because my leg hair at that point, I don't know if I think I may have touched a razor once at that point in my life. I think once at 16, I experimented with a razor when I tried to do a femme type of period, try to present that way. Is that the way the kids say it? I love all these new lefty terms that I have to learn to explain things that, that are just regular, normal phenomenon, like intersectionality. Yeah, okay,
Right.
I mean, I don't have to read 5 books to figure out that black lesbians get screwed over more than other people. I can kind of intuit that from life, and I'm pretty intuitive about that, a lot of this stuff. But so, Austin, Texas, I was funding my underpaying jobs at this point, because what happened was the first day I walked into the club, I made $400 that afternoon. And at this point, my biggest jobs had been teaching assistant. I was a graduate teaching assistant, and been teaching my own classes. So that was basically the extent of my $800. I thought I think I made maybe $800 a month back then, and I was just like, damn, that's so much money. But I had $400 in an afternoon, and I would do things like just sit. Like, I had no idea. I mean, I'm not someone who really understood how high heels worked or makeup worked, and I still do this when I'm more comfortable. I usually man spread when I sit, but I don't want to get too far away from the mic, so I'm trying the legs cross thing here. But I basically would just plop myself on guys' laps, and with my voice, and I've had this voice since I was young. Like my voice changed when I was 12 or 13, and then by the time I was 16, I already sounded like a 40-year-old man. So it was just the first day at work, I was a disaster, and I made $400. I mean, not a disaster. I had the clunkiest shoes. I didn't really understand, the right kind of outfits or the hair, the manageability of hair. But anyway, it ended up becoming something very different, which shift my mindset very profoundly, was through this experience of that job. And the other jobs that changed that too were becoming being a token right-winger at a left-wing radio station so far to the left that it wouldn't affiliate with Pacifica. It still exists. I won't say which station it is, but it's spelled K-O-O-P. I have
no idea which one you're talking about.
It's a very controversial freak show. It's a very controversial, long-running Austin freak show. I think the drama has long since cleared up, but for many years it was a battleground between white privileged leftists and Mexican leftists who were so goddamn cynical. So, and I ended up becoming the end result that everyone could agree on, because at least I understood how money worked.
Okay, so basically you're just your typical anarchist dyke libertarian who worked at a leftist radio station and was a stripper. That's ordinary. So I think we're pretty much done here.
But no, I was very distinctly, though, an objectivist, right, libertarian, but my objectivism got screwed up a little bit by 9/11, which is where Antiwar.com comes in. So this, it all connects. Helping rebuild the church for the elderly, aging Branch Davidians, the stripping, Alex Jones.
Angela, so maybe you're not clear. What I meant by that is that was the greatest introduction in unregistered history by any guest.
Oh, we haven't got to the good part yet.
I'm just trying to figure out where we go from here. I want to unpack every little piece of that because it's all so delicious, okay? So hold on. So where you last left us, yes, you were stripping in a club in Austin, Texas. Yes. Okay. But with hairy legs? Or no, not...
I eventually figured out there's much more grooming involved, too, when you're wearing tea bags and G-strings, because I just didn't, conventional North American women's grooming I didn't do. I had armpit hair I used to bleach out and dye and so on. So I never shaved. I just didn't know how things have changed. Now I shave my arms every day, but it's a different person then.
Yeah, people have now forgotten that you work for Antiwar.com because they're so mesmerized by all the rest of this. Okay, let's track back, as they like to say. Okay, you are from Long Island. Correct?
Yeah, more or less. The family, and this is why I'm trying to be very delicate, because my mother's very sensitive about how I present myself in her later years, because I've learned so much about my mother.
You think Mom is listening?
She can't listen. This isn't live, right?
When it's aired. Will she listen?
it might end up on her radar screen. And because of
Hi, Mom.
RT, Abby Martin ended up on her radar screen. And that came as a whole other interesting side note about my mother and I really getting to know each other the past 4 or 5 years, and really having not the political discussions we had when I was a little girl, because she used to speak to me like an adult, unfortunately, when I was a little girl. But when she was able to be around, she worked. I'm very, very proud and very protective of my mother. She managed to juggle several jobs and graduate programs all at the same time, and she made sure that she knew how to get things done. And I'm just very protective of her. And we had a large argument not about a year or two ago about a interview I did with a kind of these kind of hot young Jordanian anarchist Ron Paul kids, but they're all like heavy jewelry, the Mercedes, BMW, daddy's princes, that kind of thing from LA. And my facade of trying to fit into my mother, my mother has really, I know socioeconomic class and money are all different things, but she has done very well for herself, very well. And she lives in one of these fancy gated communities, and I'm extremely impressed of what she's done and how she's done it and how she got there. I mean, it doesn't really make her upper middle class, but we like the illusion of that. And And so one of the things is when I talk about the Bronx, for example, or something like that, or that the city or the urbanness comes back out, it really upsets her, because my being more refined really was her goal, because she had ambitions for my sister and me, and those were medical school or law school. So it was a very wide range of activities we were allowed to do. But currently, my mother plays a sport that requires a 52-card deck, and she's almost like, I don't know if she's like semi-pro, but she's like becoming like a...
That's a sport or a game?
Well, it's a game, I guess. One of those. I don't want to say which one it is, but it may not be the obvious one you might think. But yes, she does. She's a player of a 52-card game, and she does this rather well, and occasionally plays tournaments. Uh-huh. So there's also that aspect too, that it's I'm a little.
Is it okay?
Little protective, and then my sister and my sister's one of the most interesting intellectually and eclectically people I've ever met, and artistically too. She was the first just natural artist I'd met in my life, though I didn't know I was surrounded by a few. But she and I have had to have discussions over the sex work and dancing very early on. Like when I first approached the subject, I didn't tell anyone but my best friends, two of my best friends, and my sister. And my sister's immediate reaction was, well, what about feminism? And my sister, it was a very interesting discussion. She was a bit hostile, but not hostile in the way you'd think. It became a debate and struggle. But years later, the reason why I've been very tactful and circumspect about talking about dancing is because my niece is a professional, she was in a dance company since the time she might have been 7. She never has gone to conventional school. In fact, her going to college is her first conventional school. And my sister and I did not want to necessarily introduce the concept that those skills and art abilities that she has could be monetized that way. And that's just not, and I agree with her. It's just not the age of the discussion for that discussion. So that's why I've been much more guarded about how I present certain things and not being so specific. So they have a little bit of privacy, because if you had me as a daughter, could you imagine, what do you tell people, if you have me as a daughter at the club?
Well,
or you're in the gated community.
Depends on who you are.
Right. So
I'd be pretty proud.
This is the interesting thing.
But I'm weird. I know. But your mom was weird, wasn't she?
Well,
in these ways. So,
she's a very, the right-wing objectivism streak is straight.
So stop right there, okay? So your mom is from the Bronx?
Yes, so just leave it right there. Okay, no more.
Well, she was an objectivist.
Yeah.
Meaning she was an acolyte, I suppose, of Ayn Rand?
She liked Ayn Rand. She liked Ayn Rand.
She was a follower of Ayn Rand.
And she also was liked the idea of being ambitious and making money.
And was she the Jew or the Irish one?
There's no Irish involved. Well, the only
Keaton?
Irish I've had ever involved in me lasted about 2 or 3 humiliating minutes at a time. So in fact, if we can get racialist, we can talk about
totally. This is an alt-right show. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this, I guess it probably is.
We talk about nothing but race, and that's all that matters. What matters is what race everyone is.
Right.
That's all that matters.
No, and that's kind of why I'm going to be sensitive too in the discussion about my old man in a bit too, because I did not. The jokes about intersectionality and things when, it's because non-blacks, including myself, have our heads up our asses a lot on really innovative concepts. The first time somebody tried to introduce me to the concept of Kimberly Crenshaw, who does critical race theory.
Columbia Law School. Yeah.
Right. And so the first time someone brought that to my attention, and I was really young. I was a teenage girl. I just didn't know what to make of it, but I kept it in the back of my brain, but I didn't get it. I couldn't really unpack it. And then I didn't realize how many things that applied to it, but it just, using Marxist circumlocutions or whatever just doesn't suit my personality. Like, I hate saying sex work, okay? I was a topless dancer. If you're gonna be vulgar, I was a stripper. And my buddy, I have buddies who are escorts and doms and things. We're not, we're not a Marxist collective. We're women and men with different skills and specialties and particular talents. And so it's only been in the past few years that my mother and I have gotten close in a different way. And also, I've really had a lot of chance now to reflect on how my old man, who really was the one who got me into libertarianism, Ayn Rand, objectivism, all that. And it was in part because of, I'll just say this will be where I stop at ethnicity. My father's father was one of my family members who never bothered to learn English at all, ever learned English at all. And my father didn't have a mother, so it was a complete disaster for him growing up. And one of the ways he got himself out of juvenile delinquency and drugs and a life that would have just been another stat was by learning how to read and reading well. And because of Ayn Rand, he read everybody from Michael Harrington all the way to Irving Kristol. And he wasn't a typical father. I was not a daddy's princess. And I, to be quite honest, I think the whole kids thing was really uncomfortable for him. I don't think that was really what he wanted. But I became his buddy, and I'd hang around him while he was working on his master's and PhD all the time. And he would give me notebooks and things to write in, and always let me read as an adult. But now some of this, now I'm saying this, and I'm editing the parts because I'm trying to make it clean, very clean. I mean, depending on how you look at it, I mean, a lot of times when when relatives or my grandmoms or all my different relatives, aunts and things were not available for babysitting because my parents both worked and went to school at night. So sometimes my father would just let us loose in campus bookstores. Like my sister and I just be running around, and we just would read whatever they want, including things like that's how I discovered Playboy when I was really young. And he very much, when he could get away with it, would let us just hang out all day at college libraries. So that's sometimes how my sister and I were babysat, was through the university library.
Through porn.
No, every university library. I was going to say, where I learned about things like assassins in the U.S. government.
Porn is a good babysitter.
Well,
it keeps the kids busy for a long time.
I don't want to date myself, but it was a very special issue. But then when my father discovered that my sister and I had discovered what this was, he let us look at it, and then we had this kind of discussion about what kind of, in his way, he would kind of discuss these things. My old man was a cynical son of a bitch, literally. This is my father's idea of a drug talk to me, and this was his great talk to me on drugs. Pot, that's a hippie drug. Coke, that's a productive drug.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a total, I'm cynical about everything. I mean, his idea, this is my father's idea of a sex talk. We're outside in front of our house, and this girl, like about 19, is with the baby stroller. She's pushing the baby stroller, and my father looks at her and looks and he says, "You know what's going to happen to her? Nothing." That was the sex talk. The sex talk it has nothing to do with morality or anything such that it would never occur to me to have, in my adolescent years, to have sex, because I knew that if I did not get a free ride, if I did not get a lot of scholarship money collected and go to college, which I did, I ended up starting college when I was 16. I knew on some very fundamental level that I would end up back in the places where my family came out of. So I knew that I had to kind of really work to crawl out of things. And I did crawl out. My father and I were clashing a lot as I got older, and I was challenging him a lot more intellectually and also ethically and morally. And so we would clash, and my mother she rose from being basically a Howard Johnson's waitress to being a testing and measurement specialist. So, and she and her sisters were all in various kinds of special education. And so was my father. They did a lot of work in alternative education, special education, what was then called retardation and learning disabilities. Those things were discussed, the early days of the gifted and talented programs.
So let me. Okay. So can I want to see if we can set the scene. So like the characters are there, some of the setting is there, and a bit of the plot is there too. But can we? I just want to get all the facts in line, and then talk about those. Okay. So, mom's from the Bronx. Yes or no?
Yes.
Am I allowed to ask what her ethnicity was designated as? I'm not saying it's a true thing, but. Did she identify at all? She
really has made herself beyond that.
Okay,
she really,
but it's important though, so I'll get to why it's important. It's fine if you don't want to say. How about your dad? He's from the Bronx too?
Yonkers more.
Okay.
Yonkers,
same general part of the world.
Right,
well, it's not the Bronx.
Yes, I'm sorry, they're all sensitive.
It's not the Bronx, but it's close enough. Okay. And his ethnicity? No.
Well, I'll just say my father came here directly from Naples, and
okay.
There was he had other children.
So he was black, is what you mean?
But from Naples, Italy.
Yeah, black.
Okay,
perhaps. The Italians were black.
No. I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. No, I don't care about, I'm a sub-Saharan. I'm all...
No, my work is partly about the Italians who were designated as black.
Yeah,
then,
yes. My father
about the time your dad was born, Italians were considered by many people to be black.
Yes, and
or at least part black, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. Well,
especially from Naples, the southern Italy.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yes, and he had another... unfortunate ethnicity, so he was very dark, and he did not have, his name was not Keaton, and his full birth name helped him use affirmative action for foreign students, even though he was born in good old US of A, to help him get a little bit of extra money so he could go to school once he finally got his act together and sort of got through community college without ending up dead.
Okay.
So
all right, so I'm thinking, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking there are these unnamed ethnicities, okay? And they are in the Bronx and Yonkers, New York, generally speaking, in the, 40s and 50s we're talking here? As they're growing up, your parents?
40s, 50s, and 60s, I guess, yeah.
Okay, so if you think about those unnamed ethnicities in that part of the world, in that particular time in history, and you tell me they're both going to become fans of Ayn Rand, I'm telling you there's something weird going on here. Not in a bad way, hang on.
No, okay.
Because, as many people know, those people, generally speaking, of course, gravitated quite famously and en masse toward socialism and Marxism, right? So some of the greatest leftist intellectuals in American history have exactly the same backgrounds as your parents geographically and ethnically. So I'm just curious, how on earth did they find themselves reading Ayn Rand and agreeing with her?
Well, in my mother's mind, it starts really with my grandmother, who's really the key kind of to all this. My mother's mother, she had a very huge, she spent a lot of time with me when I was a little older, like from about 8 or 9 on to my early teens, and she was a very unusual woman in her politics and her thoughtfulness. And her goal was, and she did this, to get out of the Bronx and to move to upstate New York and buy land and do organic gardening, because she really did not, now that we call things like big agra and all that stuff, but those words weren't there then, but she had a lot of issues with how Americans get their food, how we eat, corporations,
This
and
is
so on.
long before Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. This is back in the, 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe?
Well, no, she.
This is your grandmother.
Yes, my grandmother. So she, my grandmother died in 2006, and yeah, two major things happened mid last decade that created major traumas for me, and my grandmother's death was one of them. What happened to my grandmother is that she had to suppress her dreams to do what she thought was the right thing in life. And if she had never had children, she would have probably been able to do what she really wanted to do with her life, but she thought having children was really important to her, or to what was the right thing. And my grandmother, who had no education, I don't know how much high school she even had. She spoke several languages, and taught herself Portuguese. She spoke Spanish, fluent Italian. She was just very, she considered herself a citizen of the world. That was very important to her. And she was a syncretist. She loved all different religions and saw very interesting beauty.
Syncretism. I was just studying that word because I wasn't totally clear what it meant, and I was using it. I was doing research for the book I'm writing right now about cultures, the diffusion of cultures internationally, globally, and how they come together, right? And it's about cultures doing that. It's about hybrid cultures. It's about things merging and becoming something new, right? Is that what she was
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, and just being able to combine, because let's say, okay, like some people think these are weird things. Like I meet people all the time who are like this, like, just you're half Catholic, half Jewish, or say, and like that's a very normal thing to me. And I don't think, the way I grew up and the way my father's attitudes were about certain things, these kind of different people who had a combination of backgrounds or had several different racial and ethnic histories in their background, or just had, or were eccentric or unusual, were something that were not disrespected in my household, or in the households I was living in, because I was kind of bounced around with the relatives because my parents were always constantly working, going to school. So my grandmother, she traveled. She whenever she had extra time and money, and she would even leave my grandfather and the kids at home, and she went and traveled
by herself.
Yes.
Wow.
And then in her later years, she traveled with her mother, who while
again, this is before second wave feminism is
all,
even a thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No. This is all like
that's impressive.
She and the last trip she wanted to take was going to be to Turkey, Greece, Egypt, and Israel. And she was never able to make that trip because 9/11 happened, and then after that she became too frail to travel anymore. So, and I had just gotten back, I think what I mentioned way back, if we go to the beginning of the story, when I was sitting in that cafe in Spain in towards the end of the 1999. That was kind of like the beginning of my adult life, and where like I really started to become a decent human being, a decent, thoughtful human being, because I wasn't always, but the background I grew up in, I had my mother's second sister. She was an artist and who went and lived in the hills of upstate New York, in one of those kind of arts colonies where she lived with her boyfriend, and we knew that though we didn't. I didn't approve. I never approved. I was a very reactionary little young lady, very reactionary. I didn't like that kind of nonsense. And that's where, also to more deeper into vegetarianism and organics and art. And she taught me to hike. This aunt taught me how to hike, and we did a lot of nature BS and ate gorp, and she had a Volkswagen and was very not much of a conformist.
What did your dad think of her?
Oh, this is my mother's sister. She and my dad clashed a lot. Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah, she and my dad clashed quite a bit, actually.
So your dad was a political radical, but culturally not so much.
My old man and I talked about a lot of this stuff, because this is.
Although he liked cocaine, apparently.
Well, yeah, I was going to joke about the show. It should be titled "Ukraine and Cocaine," but he was a cynical guy, and he had a lot. He he was cynical about everything. The way he communicated politics to me, like he'd let me just read whatever, but it's not like he was talking about, this is what Murray Rothbard said. This is how he communicated things to me. Like we had discussed, like I asked him one day, because he didn't have a lot of friends, and I said, did you have a best friend? He said, yeah. I said, well, what happened to him? He's dead. Well, what happened? He had to go to Vietnam. Why did he have to go to Vietnam? He was black. Okay, so that was my father's discussion on race and empire. I mean, I didn't need to, like I didn't.
And friendship.
Yeah, it just like,
right?
But like there was the discussion. I mean, that was, and like, but he'd say things to me like this when I was like, 6. And my mother would discuss like when concepts on television shows or whatever, and she would ask me, well, what do you think of that? Because and I was a little kid.
Well, no, I'm wondering where your cultural reactionary politics came from. The idea that women shouldn't strip or show their bodies, and that they should.
I didn't think men should either.
Wives and mothers. So
well, I mean, when I was a little girl,
sexually reactionary. So where'd that come from? Was your dad sexually uptight? Or,
oh God, no. No, but they never really discussed it because my mother's focus was, in order to survive in the society, you have to do certain things. Because my mother's goal was to improve her life, just like my grandparents had, and she had a lot of wonderful and amazing ambitions, and they were, for her, getting a chance to be a conformist in middle class was a wonderful chance and opportunity. Being bourgeois is a really lucky and fortunate thing for so many people, and so it's very difficult to talk about certain things that shaped my past or whatever, because my mother has worked so hard to move up in the world.
We're also talking about second-generation immigrants?
Yeah. My grandparents are all speaking nonsense. Yeah.
Yes.
Nonsense.
Yeah, so that's the other major force here, right? It's not just the ethnic stuff, the cultural stuff, but it's also that, the immense pressure that immigrants in America and their offspring have felt to become bourgeois and live in a suburb.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and live out in Long Island.
Yeah,
but also it's just like, and I, amusingly for a group of people who all went into special education, my sister and I both had different kinds of, educational disabilities that we call them. I would just call them, I can't do that so well. But one of the things that has shaped me is I have difficulty with, for me, expressing myself in any language at all is difficult. I'm very inarticulate, and it's taken such work to learn how to be articulate and how to do spoken English. And there's several reasons for that. One is I'd started teaching myself how to read. And my mother's response to it was whole word method, which is not phonetics. And I see word pictures. This is very difficult for spelling in English, because if I can't see it, I can't spell it. I can still proofread, though, because my brain will say something's wrong. But I have difficulty pronouncing certain words, even common everyday words that are used. And it took me a little while. And part of this is because I was exposed to many different people with different levels of education. But once I'd gotten a handle on learning how to read, then my communication form would be writing. And I started keeping journals and diaries, and I started writing a lot of stuff, including, I think, political manifestos and crazy stuff. But I was very, I guess in my own way, when I was a little girl, I was kind of being a little bit of being kind of a reactionary, was a rebel. But something about libertarianism back in the day, I won't say when that day was, but libertarianism goes through those right-wingy periods, and Rothbard had some of those right-wingy periods. And my father, even though in a lot of ways he absolutely had no regard for cultural norms in any real way, he could have what he expected of what he think should be expected of other people. I guess I don't know. I remember though when I was still going to regular school, and this was a very good school I was going to, my buddy and I, who were in the gifted program, we had decided that there was pornography in the library, and we needed to go find it and root it out and report people. And we had decided that it had oral sex in it. I don't know where we'd gotten these ideas, but the oral sex, as far as we knew, understood, was a man urinates in a woman's hair. So
that's a trick.
Yeah. So anyway, the school librarian did sit down with me, explain there were not these tracts are not being carried, and I might not. I might need to consult some sexual manuals. So my father gave me a book.
But that sexual prudishness did not come from your parents.
No, that's me. That's me.
Was it a reaction to them? Were they the opposite? Were they sexually libertine?
No, they just never. It just didn't come up.
Okay.
It just not something.
Like
that
most parents, they were silent about it.
Well, my mom. I mean, this is like my mother. When the discussion of prostitution came up, my mother's discussion was basically, well, it's a woman who's in an independent business.
Oh.
It was kind of...
That's not bad.
Well, I mean,
That's better than most moms.
Well, this is, I mean, my mother's gone through an evolution on things, and it took me, and she and I only really finally came to this discussion in the past 6 months where her different forms, the differences in how she sees feminism, and the kind of 1970s feminism that kind of became the more mainstream, not the 70s radical kind, but the more mainstream feminism. She understood why women thought that way. But I didn't realize she struggled with it. I didn't get that because I was too busy seeing her work and achieve and get ahead under some really unusual conditions. And she...
what part of feminism did she struggle with?
The kind of ordinary, I guess now they would call it like classical liberal, or I guess maybe even now it's degenerated to something called white feminism, which I do have a description for that. But she really struggled with that, in part because she would never use a word like patriarchy. But she finally communicated to me, and this is not about approval of sex work or any of that, it's about reality. It's about the nature of men and women and the way things are under the way we live now. And she's come to a place where that if you're with a man, it has to be a man who can financially support you. It has to be a man who can allow you to that your work is not about you earning a living. Your work is about your own woman's personal achievements. And that's the only way there can be any kind of equity under patriarchy. And that brings us to this life-changing thing that I found online in November 2015. I just finished therapy. I was in cognitive behavioral therapy for a year and a half.
Good move. I spent 10 years with psychoanalytic shrinks and regret much of it. And then finally did a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, as listeners of a recent episode know, and found out, wow, it is possible to actually feel better in addition to knowing all these things about your childhood and your parents. So I'm glad you did that.
No, it was great.
Do you feel better?
Well, yeah. I mean, the reason I went into therapy because I was sort of, I guess I had gotten just back into a dating scene, and it ended up hilarious. And I'm telling the story hilariously because I think these things are funny. Well, anyway, it ended up with a guy punching me.
What?
A guy, it ended up...
2 years ago, a guy punched you?
In 2013, and I've long since forgiven this person. But this was a person I was certain, I wouldn't say dating, but it was kind of like a relationship, of like the zygote part of relationship. So that's when I decided, when I got back from the city where this happened, I decided I needed to really change my life. And I went to therapy.
This is when you asked me to bring you to my Muay Thai gym. I think it was right around that time.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Yeah, you wanted to learn how to fight.
Right, yes, and I've actually gotten in much better shape since all that. Yeah.
By the way, anytime.
Oh,
just
yes.
let me know.
No.
Anytime. I'll take it back.
Okay, no. I'm ready to go back. I've got the bigger gym bag.
It is my very favorite thing to see women who can fight really well. I love that in the gym. When I'm in the gym, it's not a turn on sexually, but it turns me on so fundamentally, so deeply when I see women who can really kick ass. It's just the best thing. To me, it's the greatest political statement ever. It
is a political statement, and I guess it's just where...
without being consciously a political statement in most cases, right? The women, I think, who are doing this don't think in these terms, but it's not a political statement. It is here's what it is. It's a political fact, right? They can defend themselves. Right. That's a fact. It's political.
That last date, I want to be fair to the person who did this. It was, I was walking away, and it was a punch, but it kind of, because since I was walking away, there was not that much impact, and it was scratching, and mostly he just kind of scratched behind my neck, which you can't see because it's radio. But it wasn't it was a horrible experience, but it wasn't. It opened up my mind to at that moment, really, I kind of broke down, and those next few days that followed, I really discovered what kind of pain I had been in for many, many years from a relationship that I'd been in, where domestic violence was sort of an issue. But I like that to be funny stories, so I'm going to skip that for another time. But going into cognitive behavioral therapy was fantastic, and right after I got out of that, finished a year and a half where they really said, you're really, you've achieved your goals. And I found something online. I found this Twitter account online because I follow a lot of sex worker Twitter accounts. And the account, it's at Bardo Smith. And she and her two friends, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Yoshin Lords? I'm not certain how it's pronounced. I've never heard her speak. And this other woman, Lauren Schiefelk, had this hashtag, give your money to women. And it's about...
right now, I can see like a million fedoras heading for the door, right?
Oh, it's going to get weird.
Listening to this podcast,
it's going to get weird.
The Libertarian boys listening to this, running away from you. Is what I meant by that.
It's going to get weird. Yeah, we're going to go deep. We're going to get really weird.
Okay.
It's give your money to women. And once I went into that rabbit hole, I understood a lot of things about feminism and myself, and understanding my mother's evolution on these things. How she, for somebody who had achieved so much on her own independently without a man helping, it's just why she got to the place where, yes, you need to, if the only way to have any kind of equity is to have a man who can support you. And she didn't say the next thing, though, because this is the thing. She's a right-winger. My mother's a proud right-winger. The next thing she needed to say was under capitalism, and that's where the give your money to women of that issue. And I really highly suggest, if you just look up Bardo Smith on Twitter, you'll find you'll go down that you'll go down that hole easily. But it just understanding what our current system is under patriarchy and how that works together. And now you're saying, I thought you're a right-winger. I am a right-winger. I'm a free market nut. Capitalism is right-wing socialism. Mm-hmm. I'm not a Friedmanite.
I agree with that.
So that's where so in kind of the past couple of years in my personal life, this is not my professional life. My professional life, I do believe in absolute equality. In my personal life, I've been practicing something called feminine supremacy, where I use my very delicate feminine energy, and which is hilarious because I'm somewhat butch in my general life, but where I'm harnessing that not as something that needs to be suppressed, or my sexuality needs to be suppressed in the name of feminism, or because it upsets Catherine McKinnon somewhere out there, but that my sexuality and, God, that's a dismal term to describe it that way, but that my physicality, it's perfectly acceptable for me to use that as an advantage in a patriarchal world. It's okay to, I was blessed with decent
So that's almost
breasts.
the opposite of what a lot of feminists would think, or a lot of people would think feminine supremacy, is that what you call it?
Well, female supremacy.
Would be. Female,
right.
yeah.
It's
a lot of people, I'm sure, hear that and think, oh, God, here's a misandrist. Is that how you pronounce that? She hates men, but that's not what you're saying. It's sort of the opposite in some ways.
Well, it's not, these things aren't so easy as... You can reconcile Camille Paglia with Andrea Dworkin if you live long enough. And that's the problem. I have ideologies, but I have life experiences, and I'm trying to integrate reality with how I think and perceive the world and make sure to accurately represent the world. And there is I didn't, as a young girl, I thought of myself as an intellectual when I was 4. I was like inventing stupid stuff and like just really, I was just already showing signs of obnoxious precocity. And I always saw myself as my mind. I never noticed my physical appearance. Right. I did not see what I looked like. And I did not understand I could leverage it as a form of privilege that would get me so much further ahead if I had understood it better and if I didn't have so many conflicts. And the reason why I left stripping was for very foolish reasons. A woman who had been my best friend on and off for many years, and she's was a very important person in my life, but someone who was inherently damaging. And the person who I was affianced to, the person to whom I was engaged and eventually married, they would constantly look for ways to make me insecure and poke at me about stripping. She questioned my motives, my values, questioning my parents. They did a lot of that. Like, they did a lot of slandering my parents, not understanding that I understand my dynamics with my parents, but not everything is about my mother and dad. And there are some things that are about me. And I realized there was a lot about me that I learned through dancing. So much. And about having financial independence and being able to write whatever I wanted to and take the jobs I wanted to. I couldn't, being a manager of a lefty radio station doesn't pay very well. And I lived in Austin at the time. So I left dancing for the worst possible reasons and got into straight jobs. And I should never have done that. I should never have left dancing to get married and have straight jobs. It was the biggest mistake of my life. It totally shaped my...
You went from the mind to the body and then back to the mind.
Went to a
in your life. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as a child, you were of the mind, intellectual. Parents were intellectuals. And then you went to the body, stripper. And then now back to the mind. Political work, by the way, is also of the mind, right? And toward the family.
But...
Right? Marriage, what was that?
So I was married for several years.
You were?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And
To someone I don't know? Or of? Is this someone I know of?
Yeah, so I'm just trying
know
to...
of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm trying to be careful in how I express things. The man I married was very abusive, and I did not realize had a history of abuse.
Sorry. I know exactly who this is. Okay, sorry. Yes, okay. I forgot that you were married. I thought it was just informal. Yes, okay.
No, it nearly destroyed me, being in that relationship. And the other horrible relationship was with my best friend. Both my best friend and my ex-best friend and my ex-husband, I was such a hard ass and such an objectivist. I never really looked at them carefully to see what kind of damage and they were carrying around, and understanding the extent of the damage and how they were looking to victimize others the way they had been victimized. And it hurt my ability. I mean, I would have kept stripping, and I would have done it until retirement, and I would have kept going and traveling with it. I was working in Vegas for a while. I would have kept doing it if not for those underlying nagging doubts. And they would constantly slander my father, who they could not possibly understand how horrible his childhood was, or just how hard it was to just, if you were born into situations, as I said, no mother, he had to do what he had to do to survive, and that includes some stealing and other things too. I mean, that's just not. And off-track betting, I knew what off-track betting was as a kid. Scams. Some members of my father's family were into scamming. So they would slander. They would try to undermine my relationship with my parents. And I didn't realize this was in part because neither of them could ever really come to terms with their parents. And because I was such a hard ass, I didn't get all of their problems, and I didn't realize how they were projecting all of their really screwed up lives onto me. And it kept me from doing the most important thing that I needed to do to have financial independence so I could be an intellectual. Because the topless dancing, I mean, when I'm talking about topless dancing, there's no sexual part I'm even talking about. I'm talking about the financial freedom to be able to write things. Like, I wrote a defense of somebody who had been caught up in the Jack Abramoff scandal. He was a professional libertarian in one of the think tanks. I'm not going to name him. If you want to Google ancient history, please feel free to do so. But I defended him, and I explained, I was able to write things like that. I was able to write very politically incorrect things. I was able to experiment with different ideologies and different writing styles. I was blogging about my life and my evolution and seeing myself change. So leaving topless dancing, in part because I can never get past the nagging doubts of my ex-best friend and my ex-husband, that, I mean, they would look for ways to cut into me and be as disrespectful of my choices as possible. And I mean, including to where my ex-husband had said, Murray Rothbard would have thought you were a Luftmensch. And I said, really? Well, that's thanks. Whatever.
Yeah, explain the term. I know what the term is, but what does it mean?
Yeah, okay. So yes, right. This Murray Rothbard's term for libertarian garbage. And
well, no, it's a man who lives in the air, meaning
yes.
his head.
Right. But
intellectual,
right.
an egghead.
The Rothbardians use that as,
and of course, Rothbard was a Luftmensch.
No, but he uses it as a slur.
Yeah, right.
He uses it as a slur.
I guess he means, when he uses it, it means a man who devotes his time and energy to ideas that are not important. Is that it?
No, it's someone it refers to someone in activism who does not have a legitimate outside source of it. In other words, someone who works primarily for the libertarian movement and kind of lives off the libertarian subculture. Mm-hmm. And that's why the term is, that's how Rothbard, and a lot of these terms are specific to the North American U.S. libertarian movement cult, the right libertarian cult. And I'm including that. And that includes, various think tanks, including the lovely one that's hosting this show, Reason, and Cato, and and the Mises Institute, and a bunch of other places. Not really kind of key to this story, though I am a part of that world professionally and had a lot of connections to it over the years. But getting into full-time political work, I took a job as as the executive director of the Libertarian Party of California, when I basically, felt like I had to quit dancing. And
now you had to quit dancing. Now, so stripping pays really well.
Yes.
And you don't have to work very much to make a lot of money doing it. So it seems like pretty much the perfect occupation for a lot of people, but in particular for people who want to do something like politics, which doesn't pay so well and does take a lot of time. So that was what you were aiming to do, is that right? To support yourself as a political intellectual by stripping. And the reason you didn't was that your ex-husband and your friend were undermining that, or calling that into question?
Constantly undermining it, and it just made me so neurotic.
And you bought into it.
Yes, I mean,
you started to agree with them.
Right. I mean, there would be. It took me a while. It always take me a while to understand that when I was being insulted.
What were they saying about it? What was wrong with stripping to them?
It's an occupation that damaged women take, or women.
They had that kind of old feminist take on it. That it's objectifying and degrading.
No, I'm just going to be blunt. I don't give a fuck. I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to let loose on this. If you were molested as a child, that's not an excuse to be an asshole. Mm-hmm. And it's not an excuse to be an asshole to others and abuse others and take others down with you. And this whole concept of borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, it's a cover. It's a cover for people who are either evil or people who probably were horribly abused as children, but they've chosen to act out against the rest of us. And I reject the whole concept of mental illness I'm a Zazian, but it's beyond that. I've lived in the real world. Evil choices exist. People make them. And both this person, who I've forgiven her in so many ways, the best friend, the ex-best friend, and my ex-husband, who is just not a decent human being in any way. There's nothing redeeming there. Because of the horrible things that happened to them. And if I understood it better, I would never had built bonds with them, because you can't build good friendship bonds with profoundly damaged people. Now, I have a lot of friends who think they're profoundly damaged, but they're actually just highly enlightened and very bohemian and artsy, and just they've taken whatever that damage is and they've created amazing things with it. Built things, businesses, industries, art, amazing lives. I mean, I've had friends one of my closest friends, her mother had men by 3 different kids and comes from one of the ethno-racial groups that we like to shit all over, and, built herself up into a very wealthy woman. And I mean, I see great examples and things around. I mean, I see wonderful things around me. But these two people, they did not like the fact. And this is something that what had happened was, through the dancing, when I made the money, the intellectual, that's one huge column there, the whole money from being intellectual. The other column was, I discovered so many things about myself. I liked the work, I liked being physical, I liked doing manual labor, I liked talking to different people from all kinds of backgrounds, I liked the artistry, I liked learning how to do makeup, and learning how to do different kinds of grooming things, and meeting women from all over. I've met women from all over the world dancing. I remember one day I was sitting, and this is in Austin, and I was eating at my favorite Lebanese place, and just sitting there, and I'm there, kind of my butch self, and one of my coworkers from the club walks in, and she walks in with her hijab and her family, and she's Persian. There was just that look, and we both then continued on about our business. I mean, all kinds of women are from everywhere, and you don't know who they are. And it's amazing. And the women that you don't, until you are backstage and you're talking to women, and it is multiracial, and there's different classes. That shocked me too. And there's people from different.
Sex work has always been that way.
Yes, and it just, but the amazing amount of knowledge that's in that dressing room, it allowed me to get to I met like this one Southern belle who told me I'm just gay. And she was a PhD student, and she took me under her wing. She was dancing at the time, but she was learning how to be a dominatrix. And she kind of took me under her wing as her apprentice. So I worked as a dominatrix apprentice. And that was one of the most exciting things I'd ever done. It was amazing. You'd meet the most interesting men who could fully articulate their sexual fantasies. And be pretty comfortable about them. Now, when I say sex, we're not talking about full service things. We're talking about things that are much more beyond, much more interesting than full service. To me, the whole penis and vagina thing, I take it or leave it. I don't really care. But to me, that's not even a key part of anything that's sexual. But all the elements of fantasy and the creativity. She had a St. Andrew's cross and all kinds of beautiful, beautiful whips and floggers and paddles. And she trained me on how to different techniques of flogging and paddling, and the enjoyment these men would get, and things like nipple clamping and little tiny electroshocks to the testicles, and it was just absolutely fascinating to me, and the depths of their kind of.
So that's BDSM.
Okay, I guess,
right.
yeah.
So,
okay,
right. I mean, that's what you're talking about now.
So
it's both in stripping and in BDSM, which you found through stripping, I guess. You found. Sounds like, and I love the descriptions, just whole worlds that were. I think this is a good word, beautiful to you.
Yes.
In many ways.
Very beautiful to me.
And satisfying to you in many, many ways.
Yes.
Right? Sexually, physically, emotionally, mentally, intellectually, all that, right? Okay. Wow. So as you're talking, I'm noting some conflicts. Yeah. And can I? Oh, yeah, sure. I don't know if I maybe can
present
answer them. My hypotheses just about conflicts, and that's all. So what I see when you were a kid is both parents are intellectuals. And you are an intellectual, but you can't read very well. Okay, so that's a big conflict, right? And must have been hard and must still be hard. But certainly when you were a kid, to not be able to keep up, at least on the page, I suppose, with your dad and your mom and everyone else around you. And in a sense, to keep up with your own ideas. Is that right?
Well, what happened
was your reading ability didn't match your intellectual ability.
Well, what happened was my mother taught me whole word method after she realized that I was trying to teach myself how to read. And then I went to like a weird combination Grange / Montessori / some kind of stupid school for a while. I mean, not stupid, I'm sorry. It was just kind of a more painful experience. But then when I had finally gotten like into a regular educational classroom, they did this thing, they tried to present phonics to me. And I didn't get it, but I already knew how to read. And I started reading from the teacher's planning book, and I said, this, and this, and this. And they said, what the hell's going on here? So they ended up removing me from the classroom and putting me into a special program. And there was no program for young people who were showing abilities in science or being able to have discussions about politics. So once I'd started, and they took me to a speech therapist too, but they realized that the way I sight read, that I was too advanced to be with these kids. So I was already then pushed. The only thing they thought to do is then push me with kids who were much older. And I was already a very small, slight child whose gender issues were going to start to emerge soon. So it ended up having to surround myself with older and older people all the time, to the point where, and I ended up in college at 16 and very far away from home. And that led down a whole a whole path. But anyway, I quit. The point is, and for the bio part, I quit a perfectly good PhD program and was a stripper.
So that contradiction was resolved? Is that what you mean? That you clearly, if you got into college when you were 16 and then was in a PhD program, you learned how to read well enough to keep up. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, the reading part is really well. The speaking part is horrible.
Speaking. Okay. Well, same thing.
Speaking.
So that's still a conflict, though, right?
Oh, it's horrible.
So I'm sure your dad, because he was in a PhD program. What was his field?
Sociology.
Yeah. Okay. Where was he? Columbia?
Oh, hell no. He went to a night school one of those schools that that you can kind of pay to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You could get a PhD in sociology at a night school?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
if you look hard enough, they're out there.
But I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine, because I've known a lot of people like this, that he did a lot of speechifying, right, at the dinner table or just in front of you or to you, right? He did a lot of talking.
Oh, my whole family had everybody, both sides, everybody in it, all the different ethnic groups they married into. Dear God, everybody was marrying out, so it just became a chaotic situation where nobody really got along very well, but they all had political opinions, which they all felt they should share with the kids.
Mm-hmm. And I bet they articulated those opinions in the form of oral essays. Am I right?
Rants.
Yeah, but I mean, very long, very detailed, very ornate,
and
probably pretty architectural in the way they were structured in some ways.
There's also a lot of arguing and debating.
A lot of orating.
Oh yeah, there was disputes. There were disputes on a lot of different topics. I mean, my grandmother was such a kind of an innovative thinker on so many things. I just didn't realize that until I've gotten a lot older, but she was the one who had the hugest influence on me.
I was going to get to that other. That's the other conflict I was going to identify. But but there you are as a kid with similar ideas and a similar mind, but you can't articulate it as well. At least you think you can't.
Right.
And how did that feel? I mean, were you not speaking when your family was going on and on in front of each other?
I eventually started to assert myself, but it was much later. But I had trouble asserting myself with my father because he was so damn certain about ideas, and he talked to himself a lot trying to work. I mean, it was really. I mean, he'd gone to a decent SUNY's master program, but he could not have the kids and do the work. It just was too much. So he went to kind of a crap night school. And
did he become a professor? Did he get the PhD?
He did, and he taught for a while. But I mean, he taught community college level.
Okay.
I mean, it was just
so your father was a sociologist.
Yeah. Huh. But economics was what he wanted to do, economic theory.
And he was a Randian, an objectivist.
Well, that's where he started. He was a Rothbardian, what we call Rothbardian ANCAP was what he was. And so, and
there just weren't very many of those around. In that milieu, there were lots of political radicals around, right? In New York in that era, but they didn't go in that direction politically. So he must have been just weird on top of weird.
Oh, it was so many layers. There were so many layers of that, and he was
very sure of himself, and he would talk to you, I'm sure, with tremendous confidence, or at least it seemed to you like he was confident.
Right, but also,
and you couldn't talk back.
Well, because also too, when you were in that Rothbard milieu, you remember Murray Rothbard was read out of the right a few times by William Buckley. So was Ayn Rand. Buckley, my father had such a profound conflict about Buckley, and it probably is the underlying thing that kind of created so much tension. So yes, William F. Buckley, I think, probably in some ways is the most evil man of last century. Because sometimes I go through different time, but yeah, William F. Buckley Jr. is the worst person from last century.
Wait, why is that?
It created these kind of weird conflicts in my father because we had I was reading National Review and Commentary when should not have been reading them. I'm not saying that necessarily. I mean, like they shouldn't. Those are not periodicals that should be read without adult supervision.
Right,
They're
so
horrible pieces of propaganda.
Right. So in the 1950s and 60s, Buckley and the National Review start to purge all the libertarians, right? And Rothbard is one of them, and Rand is another, and all those people get purged, and they establish themselves as conservatism plus the warfare state, right? Yeah. That was the National Review, rebranded by Buckley, and the casualties in that fight were people like your dad.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Right. He didn't he was too conflicted. He didn't get he had too many conflicts. I mean, he took me out to Sharon, Connecticut one day to point out Buckley's house.
Oh, wow.
On one day. And then on another day
wait. So but I assume he was at this point obsessively enraged by Buckley, or was he still did he want to be Buckley? Did he feel spurned by Buckley? What was it?
He didn't know what to think because this is when Buckley was writing, excerpts of his fiction were in Playboy, and I didn't like, I tried to ask my father, so, like, what does that mean with his Catholicism and all that? And I'm sure I was like, if you're talking to an idiot kid who has a weird question like that. But my father says, when you're as rich as Buckley or those kind of people, you can do whatever the hell you want, and no one says anything. There became a class element. See, there's, to me...
Sounds like some envy.
Was
there envy? Class envy?
Okay, neoconservatism is where a couple of large Catholic families and a couple of large Jewish families basically robbed conservatism, grabbed it, and took it to create
You just totally
power.
essentialized them ethnically. I want
Yes.
to point that out.
No, we're going straight down that path.
Okay.
Because libertarianism is not a WASP thing. It is not Anglo-Germanic. The Pauls and the Kochs are merely, I mean, they're decorative people who followed...
it's Jewish and Catholic.
Right, yes,
totally.
they followed ethnic Catholic and Jews around, and that's how they got to be the Kochs and the Pauls.
In its origins.
Right, yes.
The WASPs have sort of hijacked it,
yes,
kind of, right?
But it's not... But the thing is, neoconservatism is like the mirror inverse of American libertarianism in terms of you've got... these people, you've got people like the Crystals and the Podhorses. On the other hand, you've got Rothbard and Rand over here. And these are like, there's going to be, and Zoss and all these others. And this is almost like a mirror image of what's happening because there's no WASP. Like, it's almost as if you chopped off the elite class and you try to recreate your own social structure and environment where you can rise to the top. Sometimes I get heckled from leftists, and they don't get it because I don't expect them to get it. I don't expect them to get it how important Ayn Rand is if you have to struggle, especially if you're a woman and you're trying to crawl out of something, having that voice. Because, I mean, most of the things that people complain about Ayn Rand about, they call her sociopath, is she behaved like a man. She behaved in an asshole way that men do under patriarchy. And that's still why I'm still so attracted to her. In the way she just such a hard, cynical approach to reality, even though she was a romanticist and all those other things that go with that. But those, objectivism has its own conflicts. I mean, I doubt that Leonard Peikoff or what I've seen of David Kelly or Yaron Brooks are very mentally healthy people. And I know this because that's a subset of the already.
You just called out a bunch of Randian objectivists,
yes,
right? Okay, just so people are clear.
But it's... while I'm at it, there's two favorite objectivists you should look up. Lori Rice, and that's Lori spelled with A-U, and Chris Matthews Sciabara. And those are my two favorite current living objectivists. If you're into old moldy perverts, Roy Childs, 1969, wrote his letter to Ayn Rand explaining why objectivism will get you to anarchism, which is still kind of, I think it's held up almost half a century pretty well. So that's where we go. That's where we get. So I just want to explain it to the eye. I am a right-wing kook. I'm a much more nuanced right-wing kook than you're used to hearing about. So there's a lot going on there. But,
so I'm not sure I heard an answer to the question about Buckley and your dad, that relationship. Was he angry at Buckley? I mean, what was he expressing that?
It was both an envy of how, because the Buckleys, they tried to pass themselves off as WASP, but they were just Irish Catholics.
So he was negative. He had a negative view of Buckley, and he was seemingly obsessed with him if he's taking you to his house in Connecticut to show you. Okay.
But, this thing is, what Buckley wrote about Rand, Rothbard, and the Birchers, it was the beginning of something that was kind of really spectacular, and I wouldn't be sitting here if, thank God, Murray Rothbard threw... So this is the creation story that I learned growing up. Buckley threw Rothbard and Rand out of the conservative Garden of Eden, and that's when things begin. That's the beginning of history. If you grow up in the cult group that I grew up in, and if you read, I don't want to mispronounce his name, Jerome Tucili.
Oh, yeah.
Great book. It usually begins with Ayn Rand. He just died this year. Yep. It's a comic novel. It's not a book about liberty. It's not a theory book. It's a comic novel based. Well, a little bit. You can kind of detect kind of whom is whom there, but he does a good job at kind of disguising things.
His son JD works for a reason now.
Yes, and you should definitely follow him on Twitter.
Yep, JD's great.
This usually begins with Ayn Rand. Is funny and it's still timeless in terms of how he captures every libertarian stereotype and the comedy of being a libertarian and our separate subculture.
It's exactly the same as leftist sectarian groups that I grew up around and in.
Yes.
I mean, when I watch libertarians, and especially you, because you came from this really sectarian part of it, it's exactly the same. I mean, the way they talk, the way they behave, what they do to each other, all the infighting, all the obsessiveness about, this or that split, whatever. It's the same people. And also ethnically, I have to say, it's pretty much the same people. Although we didn't have Catholics. That's, for some reason, hardcore Marxists haven't done too well with the Catholics. But otherwise, we had plenty of Jews and Italians and all that. So your dad... Here's another conflict.
Thank you, Doctor.
That I see. Again, just tell me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree with me. But it's a really interesting one, I think, and I think you'll like this. Now, I have to say, these days, especially, I've been loath to say anything that is essentialist at all.
Yeah.
This idea that women are this way or what. But I'm just going to do this because I know it's important to you, and I want to kind of work this intellectual conflict out that I'm having with you right now. Okay, so here's what I see in your life as a child, and still to this day, but certainly when you were a child. I see 3 very smart, possibly brilliant, and creative, and brave, and independent, and strong women. Mm-hmm. Okay, grandmother, aunt, mother, right?
Yeah.
And then I see your dad over here. And by the way, were they together all the way through this? Did they break
They were
up?
together, but together.
Really, they stayed together.
Together. I mean, my parents worked all the damn time.
But they lived in the same house all the way through the childhood.
Yeah. I mean, all the way through my school. Yeah, until I was homeschooling. Through my
amazing.
Homeschooling.
First of all, it's just amazing they pulled that off, knowing who they were. But
I think not speaking and working all the time held it together.
Is that what it was?
I'm sure it was. I'm sure that's what held it together because it didn't. And also, my sister was becoming a budding artist, and I was sacrificed to the gods of academia. I mean, I had to. I mean, there was it was law or medical school. I had a Gray's Anatomy coloring book.
Right.
I mean, I was either going to go to law school or med school, and that was what was going to happen. And that drive, and I did go to law school. I went to the University of Florida, and I graduated from law school, and I spent 3 years there, even though I hated it. I absolutely loathed every damn minute of it. But in the back of my head, I thought, okay, I can be an ACLU lawyer, not understanding that most ACLU lawyers work for large corporations, because ACLU lawyers, you can't afford to be a staff member. They only have so many staff members. It's not like they're handing out ACLU staff jobs.
Makes sense.
But most of the people so many lawyers volunteer their time to the ACLU. That's that's what fun. I went into law school. I was 19. I was by far the youngest person there, and very unusual because I went right from homeschool to living on my own. And now here I was with a lot of adults, and they were adults. And there's a big difference between 19 and 25 and 19 and 30. And
sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
Oh, yeah.
I just remembered the 4th woman who was so important, who was so brilliant and independent and strong, Ayn Rand.
Right.
Okay. So you got, I'm sorry, I cut
you
off your story, but
great.
I'm really taken with that. So you have 4 women as models for you, sounds like.
Yeah.
And then you got your dad.
Yep.
And your dad's a model too, in a different way. I imagine.
Totally different.
Okay, but I'm guessing at least in the conversations in the household, he's dominant. He's the one who knows what's right and what's wrong, and he's going to tell you, Angela, what's correct in the world, and don't be pregnant when you're 19, and all the rest of it. Okay, so and the women, and Ayn Rand doesn't fall into this category, but the 3 women who were related to you did not ever fully realize their ambitions or their abilities.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so there's a conflict, right? Because you want to, who should you be, And it sounds like what you decided was you got to be a lawyer. Now, here's another conflict I see. Yeah. Okay, and I've already mentioned this, but this is what I hate about intellectuals, and I think this is the problem. I think this may be the fundamental problem with intellectuals. And it's what I have always struggled with, being an intellectual, and also myself being from an intellectual family that, again, was really similar to yours, just different politics. Okay, so I know this stuff. To me, I think at the bottom of it is that they are of the mind. They have divorced themselves from their bodies. Which is either that they don't pay attention to their bodies, or that worse, they're kind of hostile to everything that is of the body, that is represented, that represents the body, like sexuality, like pleasure, like all those things. They may indulge in those things, certainly, but when they are asked to think about them, they either don't pay attention, or they think it's insignificant, or they'll think, certainly on the left, I know this is true, right, that sex is not so good unless it's, totally egalitarian and the woman is not objectified. Right.
Yeah.
So, but basically, and in popular culture and all of the pleasures it represents, right, there's this sort of distance from that, but it's really more of a hostile distance. And I'm guessing that was sort of in your family, so hang on. So that's, I've talked a whole lot about this, but that is very representative of this very long thing in Western culture, the mind-body duality, which is the mind is good, that's where rationality is, that's where discipline is, that's where work is, that's where mathematics is, that's great. And everybody who is of the mind is a good person, and those people all happen to be white and men, yes. And heterosexual until really recently.
Yes.
Okay. And the body is where all the bad stuff is. That's where the animalistic desires are, and the sex, and the drinking, and the laziness, and all the people of the body are the really bad people. And we either need to make them slaves, or put them in prison, or get rid of them. And those are the black people, and the women, and the gays, and the Jews for a time. But they also moved up into the mind pretty quickly. But anyway. So there's that conflict that's kind of always there with intellectuals, that's never which drives me nuts about them, because and this is kind of, in some ways, this is maybe the big story in all of my work and maybe in my life too. It's like that conflict was never addressed. I was always like, God damn it, can we please talk about what's on TV tonight? And is that important? And can we just enjoy it? But anyway, okay, so there you are, going to law school, by the way. Speaking of the mind, the law, it's so dry.
Oh my God.
It's so dry.
Oh my God.
It's not even of the bones, forget the body. It's this arid thing, right? It's cold and hard and steel-like. It's nothing like the body at all. It's the antithesis of the body, right? And so there you are. I can just imagine, because I almost went to law school too, by the way. I debated between going into history and law for 2 years, and then I decided that I should do history because law would be too much work. So I can just imagine you sitting in those stacks in the library at Florida with those law books. And I remember looking at law books and thinking, there's no way I could read this stuff. And the thing is, right then, I imagine, the whole time, you had a body, and you kind of liked some things about it, I bet. You haven't mentioned this yet, hang on. And you probably were curious about some things concerning the body that maybe you didn't think were important, right? Or you may be worse than unimportant, that you should avoid. So there you are, sitting in those stacks with these urges to do other things. How do you resolve that? You become a stripper.
Well, there's probably a little bit to that there, that you may be overthinking it, because going back to the thing is, it's about to be bourgeois, to be middle class in our society, when you don't start off as a WASP from Connecticut, until fairly recently, took a lot of effort. Because my parents had to work and go to school at crappy hours, sometimes going to lesser schools, and in some cases more expensive, crappier private schools, that, because there's the times you could shift things around. There's a lot of things that just never really happened. It just...
Because there wasn't time to.
There wasn't time for it.
They were working too hard.
Right, yes.
Okay.
And that's like, and the thing with law school is that my first year of law school was fully funded, and I was given I already had a job, for a campus job lined up, so for my first year of law school. So my focus, I got through college in a few years, and I left in the black because I constantly was getting scholarships and I constantly worked a job. And then you can't really work a job when you're in law school, and then the ABA really kind of discourages it. But if you're in LA, you should go to check out the People's Law School. I was not sexually active at 19. I was busy being a law student.
But did you have funny feelings down there?
Well, there were feelings from time to time, I guess. Most of the feeling, though, was a fear of like, my God, is this what my career? I mean, I did not like the people I went to law school with. I have some wonderful friends, some wonderful memories. I mean, I do have some friends from law school, but I hated every moment of the experience. It was a large state university where the top of the class really either wants to go work for the federal government in some large regulatory capacity, like the head of one of the agencies, or they're going to go work for one of the U.S. senators. They're going to, and they're going to maybe they might intern in Miami or something, but they're going to D.C. University of Florida at that time was really much a feeder school into the political class, and I was not a good match for that environment. And
political class meaning the establishment,
right?
Like the the political parties, Democrats, Republicans, office holders, that kind of politics. Yeah,
right.
Okay.
And they wanted, it was not. It was. I did not. I mean, this is the first time I didn't like school. It was the first time in my life I didn't like school because I was always good at it. I mean, I found it was something that I was good at, and even things that were kind of boring, I got good at, and that was such an important thing, and that's what had generated my success at this point.
Were you going to be a litigator?
I think my idea was that I was going to get political prisoners out of prison because I was a child. I was a teenage girl in law school.
That requires speaking in a courtroom, right?
Right.
So you got comfortable with the speaking part?
Oh, no, I was terrible in moot court. Oh, my God, I was terrible. A trial, horrible.
Talk
I'm horrible.
There's another conflict right there,
You're listening to me now on the radio. You know articulate. I mean, anyone who's listened to me speak on any radio show has heard, you can tell I have difficulty speaking and I have trouble pronouncing words. And yet I persist anyway. I mean, I do it anyway.
So when you walked in this room today, I think one of the first things I said to you, or I don't know, it was just before we started doing this, I mentioned the speech you gave in New Orleans. I was there. I gave a speech, I think, before you?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I sat down and watched you, and I'd never seen you speak in public. I'd only seen you on this TV show for 2 minutes before. And you gave a speech on feminism and empire. And it was one of the best political speeches I've ever seen in my life. And boy, have I seen a lot. And I really mean that, Angela. And I am still pissed off. And if you're listening right now and if you have that video, somebody has video of this speech somewhere. If you have that video and you're listening to this right now, you better put that on the internet tomorrow. Because it really is. And it was, I had to restrain myself throughout the speech from jumping up and
what the hell did I say?
Shouting.
I was so
it was
nervous.
Just awesome. And you were... Not, of course, the content I loved. That was part of it. But your delivery of it was so perfect. And it wasn't that you were ranting or angry or shouting or any of that stuff. You were under control. I mean, there was an anger, but it was completely under control throughout. And you delivered the speech surgically. Each point landed exactly where it should go. I thought it was a master class in oratory. Now, I do know you're nervous, when you speak like you are now, I can tell. And I think having seen you do that speech and knowing you pretty well, that's the problem. I don't think it's any kind of cognitive problem. I think it's just you're nervous. And you should do it more. And that's what I told you. I did tell you this. I remember now. In New Orleans, I went right up to you and I said, you need to do this more. And both for yourself and for the world, because it'll get you more confidence. And that's I used to be so, you want to hear this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if I've ever told anyone this, but so here I am at about the same time in a PhD program at Columbia in history, right? And you got to teach. And I wanted to teach. I thought I would be good at it. And so teaching 18 to 20 kids in a little seminar, I was nervous about that, but it was okay. And I actually loved it and I turned out to be good at it. Then after 2 or 3 years, I got a regular full-time job at Barnard as a professor. And that required, and this is what I was terrified of the entire time, I never told anybody, that required lecturing to a hall of 100 or 200 people at Columbia. Oh my God. Something about that. I get nervous now thinking about it. I was so terrified the first day of my first lecture class at Columbia. I emailed the whole class that morning and said, I have to cancel class. I have a dental emergency. It was the only thing I could think of to get me out of that. I didn't sleep for many nights at a time because I was so terrified of speaking in public. I was afraid that I would just lose it, or I would say something that would be embarrassing, that would undercut my credibility, that would show that I really am a charlatan, that I really was this dipshit from Berkeley who came from an egghead family, but of a bunch of losers. And I was a C student in high school, and then I went to this dumbass hippie college in Ohio where no one knew anything. And so I really was nobody and just a poser. I just thought all of that would become immediately apparent to all these rich Ivy League kids immediately when I was up in front of them in front of a lecture. So I was terrified all the time, and took me years of just doing it, because I had to do it twice a week for years. And I still have my moments. Oh, and then I started having panic attacks. And I used to worry about getting emotional, because I got emotional once during a lecture. And I didn't quite cry, but I got really close to it, and my voice cracked. And it was clear that I was very emotional. And this was when I was giving a lecture to 200 kids. It was about the Tulsa race riots, what are called the race riots, which was really a civil war in Tulsa between blacks in Tulsa and whites in Tulsa, and there was bombings and shootings, and the blacks fought back. And that's when I got really emotional, when I told that part of the story, that the blacks fought back and weren't just victims. Still gets me now thinking about it. And I was, from then on, for years, terrified that that was going to happen again. So I would just go into every lecture just absolutely terrified. I would white knuckle it through every one of those classes. And I don't know, I just finally just kept going, kept pushing myself and doing it. And after, I don't know, maybe 10 years, it took that long, I finally got comfortable. And now I'm nervous, but it's sort of in a normal way when I have to do public speaking. But I don't have that anymore. And I'm glad. And I think, I know, because I've seen you do it. I know you can do it. And I just wish, I don't know, I wish you would do the same thing. Now, if it's so much, I don't want you to suffer. I mean, that's what it requires. Unfortunately, it was suffering. You have to suffer to get there. And maybe that's not your life. In fact, actually, you know what? I take all that shit back. I take all that shit back, because you know what? You resolved the mind-body duality in Western civilization and in Angela Keaton by leaving law school and becoming a stripper.
No, I graduated from law school. I left the PhD program.
You left law.
Yeah, I left law. No, I went right from...
You left the mind.
I left right from law school and went right into a graduate program in religious studies for a while.
Oh, my God.
And then I went for full-on political science, got my master's degree, and was working on my PhD program. And then one day I woke up and realized I'd spent all my goddamn adult life in an institution. Mm-hmm. And I really needed, and I think that's where sort of I need to write about something else. And that's when women's studies, narrative.
Oh, but
stripping.
You were also you became a sex negative feminist, right? Because you said when you started, the stripping started with you wanting to go tear down that patriarchal institution.
I wouldn't say it was even like I hadn't bought the whole BS of the package, because they were pinkos. But enough of it sort of resonated with me because of the outside world. I mean, we're not just a product of our parents and siblings, and we're a product of the whole culture we interact with. And that also was part of influencing, because again, maybe the underlying conflict was too, is I didn't know what I looked like, and I didn't know it was okay for me to, I didn't know
physically, you didn't know what,
never knew what I looked like until fairly recently. And
Me neither. No, seriously. Yeah. I mean that too. Like it's been doing videos and podcasting and all this stuff. And just in the last couple of years where I was like, oh, that's what my body looks like. I didn't know. Mm-hmm. People would tell me things. I was like, what? I don't see that. And you start to see it. Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
No, I mean,
so you didn't know. Yeah. I can imagine being a stripper. I mean, you really have to know what you look like, don't you?
Right. And I thought of myself. I mean, I didn't see what others saw. I mean, it wasn't in a negative way. I just didn't see it. It just wasn't that important.
Yeah, right.
It was such an important thing for me to do that. And I'm so glad I got all those degrees. I kind of regret not finishing my PhD, but there's always time for that. But the working for the radio station and dancing and learning how to write other people's stuff, and I did all that in Austin, and that's where I really started to kind of strike out on my own intellectually and really start to grow and start having thoughts. And as soon as I really started to grow intellectually and started really kind of developing, I made the mistake of leaving dancing to get married.
You had thoughts before then. I think maybe you mean your own thoughts you started to have?
Right, but I mean like things that kind of came from the inside of my head, not from the outside of my head. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when I made the mistake of leaving dancing and getting into a heterosexual marriage. And with somebody who was not capable of being a normal person.
How many conflicts have I identified? Has it been 3 or 4? I forget.
Well, I mean, if you want to do a 10-hour interview, we can come up with 100.
Oh, I know. Yeah. But I'm just talking about the ones I've heard in this interview. So here's, I think, the 4th or 5th conflict, okay, which should be pretty obvious to a lot of people listening. One of the first things you said when we started talking just now is, or you described yourself when you were a kid as, what'd you say, my young dyke psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you were a dyke when you were a kid?
I was attracted to little girls as a little girl.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I didn't know how to articulate that very well. But I mean, I knew it about myself, and I knew socially it was probably best to not go in that direction. My aunt, who had become a school psychologist, had, you know, we have relatives in graduate school and your kids, and like they think of you as we can do the sample size on the kids, we can do the tests on the kids. So my aunt would just, you know, like, so are you interested in boys yet? Kind of discussion. And I said, no. But then I immediately said, no, but I'm not interested in girls either. And part of it was I had already, once my voice had dropped, it was weird. I had menarche, didn't have another period again. My voice dropped. And eventually the periods would resume. But the voice dropped, and then I started, at first it was sort of kind of Halloween dressing, and then I just started dressing like a boy and dressing like Prince. And dressing mostly in tie. Then it became ties, and you know. And yes, I went through a period, and that's
a butch period.
Yeah, very butch period. And at some point, I mean, long before.
Although Prince wasn't butch, so this is really complicated, right? Are we talking about the 80s?
This is after. This is after the 80s. No,
Post-80s. Okay.
We're getting close to the. Yeah, we're approaching here to the era of the beginning of PC and diversity and all that. So that's where a kind of everything kind of collides together, and that also affected me.
But you're dressing. You're dressing like men of the time, I guess.
Yes, and I'm dressing like, I'm absolutely doing that. And thank God, there's a lot of reasons why my father did this, but I was pulled out of conventional education, and I was homeschooled.
My God.
And
who taught you?
My father ostensibly, because he had a teaching,
you
know, so, you know, because you had to have all kinds of certifications in most places. I mean, homeschool laws have gotten a little better or more liberal.
Your dad was your teacher?
Right. And
oh, boy.
But a lot of it, though, was like, he would just say, this is the list, this is what you need to do, read this, pass this, you know how to read, you know how to do this.
Check in with me at 6 o'clock?
Yeah. And so,
Still.
It was,
Still.
Right. It was a bit much.
You had a lot of dad.
It was a bit
in your
much.
life. You had a lot of dad.
Well, I mean, my father's idea of fun was for me to put some paper in front of me. And he says, okay, like here, I don't know, here is Howard Zinn. Where does he go on this line? That's my father's idea of a good time.
He's an intellectual.
He would make me do these things, and he would and that was his idea of fun.
There's no body there. There's no bodily pleasure, right? It's all the pleasure he derived is from the mind. Is that right?
Well, a little girl, okay.
Right?
Yes. Oh,
okay.
I guess so.
Good.
I mean, I guess.
I wanted to nail that point there.
Okay. It's just funny because I felt like I knew him at certain times in my life and then didn't. And with my mother, it took me a long time.
What was the thing about the little girl?
Well, I was a little kid because I felt like I knew him at certain times and things. Because sometimes I really got to hang out with him a lot because when there was no babysitting available. But some of the things, I did do things that were physical, but I didn't realize I loved the physicality. One of them was playing piano and banging on drums or drum kits. The other was playing tennis. And I really liked the feeling of hitting the ball. And I would take the tennis ball and go take the racket and just hit up against a wall and for hours. And I know you can't really see that in the air, but I was,
They get the picture.
They get it. So,
yeah.
There's, looking back, the things I really wanted to do, if I had to go back again, I probably would have studied dance and studied physiology. I may have gone to sports medicine, perhaps, but would have done things of the body that were intellectual. And that's, I think, if I had to rewind some
what I never did? I never mentioned this thing about the mind-body duality, is that it's total bullshit. It's all made up, and that there's no necessary separation between the mind and the body. You can do all those things simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive. If you can study astrophysics and be a stripper at the same time, this is the whole thing, right? This is the whole problem. And in fact, this is haunted feminism, and this haunted Betty Friedan when she wrote The Feminine Mystique, the second wave feminist, uber text. which is that this common belief still today among feminists, which drives me nuts, is that the more you are of the body, the less you are of the mind. So that's why we can never let women be strippers and sex workers or be objectified in any way, because the more they do that, the less we will all be able to be doctors and lawyers. Well, guess what? History has shown, and that's just total bullshit, right? Because we've seen plenty of objectification over the years, and I would argue more objectification of women, at least that's available in the culture, right? We can all look at porn instantly, et cetera. The billboards all have chicks in bikinis all over the place. And women have entered simultaneously at the very same time all of these professions, right, that are completely of the mind. They are all entering the Senate and the medical profession and the professoriate in record numbers. So we can actually do both. And this is why... I think it's one of the reasons why I loved your description of your feeling, not just what stripping was, because this was I've never heard anyone describe that world to me. I'd never heard that before. How rich it was, how rich it is, aesthetically and intellectually and all these things, and artistically, was that you found in it everything. You found the mind and the body all blended together, and it satisfied all parts of you. You don't have to separate those two. You can do it all simultaneously, right?
Right.
I love that.
I did too, but the Give Your Money to Women hashtag and the work of Bardo Smith and Lauren Schieffelk and Yoshin Lords goes by, I think, Contras on Twitter. It doesn't, I mean, I'm going to be objectified irrespective of what my politics are.
Of course.
I have a cisgendered female body, even though I'm somewhat uncomfortable with it and always have. I mean, when I say uncomfortable with it, I always kind of thought I was missing a part and shouldn't have such giant boobs.
Wait, you were missing a penis?
Yeah.
Oh, huh.
But I got one up here now, so I'm good with my mental dick. But what the hell was I saying?
I just thought penis envy, Freud's terrible theory. You please don't give that any credence. So Angela, you know you just did. You gave Freud his...
No, I mean, I think that has more to do with like bad gender identifications, but
stripping satisfied all of these interests and desires in you, right?
Right. And...
physical, sexual, intellectual, artistic, aesthetic, all of those. All together at once.
Right.
The way you talk about it, it's a beautiful place.
It was an amazing place.
Yeah.
But the whole point
also, by the way, you didn't mention one really important part of it. Women's power within it, inside of it.
Yes.
Camille Paglia famously has described stripping as like a temple where all the men go to worship at the, literally, feet of the goddess.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, but I didn't get all that.
So women have all the power in that relationship, in that place. When she said that, I was like, ding, 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 assholes. That's exactly what's going on. Ask any guy who's ever masturbated to a stripper or a porn star if they felt like they had all the power in that moment when they're jerking off in front of their computers, right? Or jerking off as soon as they get in the car after they're at the strip club. Oh my God, no. We feel pretty powerless and very low on the totem pole in that moment.
Oh, that
You disagree?
Well, this is where I'm trying to reconcile Paglia with a lot of other things, because she was still is, and she just gave recently a very, really great talk on C-SPAN 3 for her new book tour, where she identifies as a transsexual, which is what I would say called third gender, I guess, now.
Okay.
And my mother asked me about that, and I said, because wasn't she a lesbian? Can you kind of explain that to me? And I said, well, she's kind of a woman, I'm using quotes, the way I am. And I introduced that concept to my mother recently, but thank God, because Paglia speaks to so many right-wing audiences, and right-wingers love her right now, that she's able to throw concepts in about gender in a way that the normals can hear, and they're not going to totally go off the rails about. And that is what I really loved about it. But ultimately, with the mind, body, and objectification, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be objectified no matter what I do. Right. I need money to live.
Right.
Okay.
By the way, if you had become a lawyer, you would have been objectified in that way.
Yes.
We objectify women for their minds, too. It's the same thing. It's reducing all objectification of human beings is a reduction of them to particular attributes or characteristics. Yes. Okay. So when we talk about how awesome a debater Hillary Clinton is, that we're objectifying her. We're just objectifying her in ways that feminism approves of. That's all.
Oh yeah, it's just Hillary got the Hillary. Oh, sorry, that
we'll get to your speech in a minute.
That's what a dark place.
That was the ultimate critique of Hillary Clinton. But we'll do that if we have time. So dyke. That's what we started with.
Oh yes.
Okay, you're a dyke as a kid.
Okay.
Then you're a butch dyke as a teenager.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And into your 20s.
Oh yeah.
Oh. So okay.
Yeah, no, I was the.
You're presenting, as they say, as a butch dyke.
Yeah,
oh, really?
I went for I even got the 1-inch haircut and had them bleach it out 3 times. Takes a lot to take black hair.
Oh no shit.
Away. Yeah.
Okay, so you had a buzz cut too.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow. All right, you went all the way.
Oh yeah, that was good. But when you're a lesbian though, and you're at a Southern campus, and you want to burn a UN flag, people are going to kind of stay away from you. Okay, I wore fatigues.
Yeah,
I mean, I
can imagine.
I was a little rough and a little bit.
You burned the UN flag?
Yeah, a couple of my other queer friends.
They wouldn't mind that part.
Well, I mean,
as long as it's that flag.
It's a weird thing, a bunch of queer kids burning a UN flag as a statement of empowerment.
It's definitely weird.
It's unusual. It's certainly. I doubt we're the only people who've ever done it, but it's certainly unusual. But
okay.
Yeah.
So you're well into your 20s.
Yeah.
When you're at Florida, right, and you're a butch dyke with the spiky hair. That's where you meet the man who becomes your husband. Am I right?
No, he'd long since graduated.
Oh.
He came back to town with his bands and shows.
That's where you met him, though.
Right. But he'd been long since out of school.
So he's a man.
Yeah.
He's a heterosexual.
Yes.
You're neither.
Right.
So here's a conflict again. What's going on there?
Because I did not. This happens to a lot of bisexual women.
Is that how you
identify? I don't identify as anything. I mean, honest to God, I just.
Oh yeah, you do. I mean, you have already several times.
I mean, there's like 1,400 different identifications that could work, but
that's fine. Yeah.
I'd had my very first lesbian relationship, and it was in my 20s for my first relationship, and I don't know why we call them relationships. It sounds so 70s, but yes, I had a love affair with a young girl who was heterosexual, and that lasted for 3 years. Instead of getting good counseling and really dealing with my sexual orientation and really being out like an adult and not out as like a novelty character on campus, instead of doing that, I went drinking for a few months. And and I turned down dates from lesbians who were much more accomplished and much more settled and much more understood, because I did not know this. And then, once I came out of that, it took me like a year of mourning and really thinking about stuff. And then I met a writer/musician that I respected greatly, and he was on his career was up, and I was a fangirl, and the power imbalance already starts becoming a problem. But it was a situation that was highly unfortunate, and I don't think I could ever, because of that, I've never been able to really connect again in a relationship.
The power imbalance.
Yeah.
Sorry to be terribly psychoanalytic, but obviously people are going to say, well, it sounds like your relationship with your father to some extent, at least in that way.
Well, sure. I mean, in that sense, I can certainly see. That part I can see, but it initially.
He's also a libertarian,
right?
So there's that too, right?
I mean, I'm just trying to be circumspect on how to speak about it, because it's there's some really. The reason why I went into cognitive behavioral therapy, I had to go into therapy to be. God, I hate the medicalization of human conditions. I just hate all of that. I'm going to put it in these commie terms, though. I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder related to and from systemic domestic violence, and that relationship changed me fundamentally. The therapy helped, but I decided I wanted to recreate myself on my own terms, and that. The shrink that I still see every quarter or whatever, still asks me about this, because this is a kind of issue where I have not ever wanted to be in a romantic or sexual relationship ever again. I tried briefly to date about a year and a half after my divorce, but with both men and women, and I just realized I did not want any violations of my personal emotional space. I do not want certain kinds of intimacy with people. This interview is the most I've ever discussed my life in public, and most of these things where I've kind of kept myself until now. And I'm only able to discuss it because I'm in a period in my life where I don't know how long I'm going to live, and I want my story to be told, because I did not realize just how remarkable certain things were about myself, my life, and my mother, and my family's accomplishments, until I kind of had to really look at myself through therapy and that lens and kind of that self-growth understanding. And that relationship was so abusive that it defeated certain aspects of me. But instead of taking that as a defeat, I wanted to say, how can I take that and become someone new and different who has an unusual perspective? And once I let sexuality in that sense go, and I'm not, sexuality is complicated, but once I got rid of all that kind of sexuality, like just let that go.
What do you mean?
I saw the whole world very differently.
What did you let go?
I just decided that I did not want to be sexual with other human beings anymore.
During the marriage?
No.
After?
This is after. This is after my divorce. Okay. After therapy, I decided. Well, during therapy, I decided I did not want to be sexual with people anymore. And this is one of the things that came out of therapy, where I did not want my personal, mental. And this is where my mind body came together. Because there's aspects of sexuality that I think violate my mental space. And because they are connected, and I don't want romantic intimacy, I find it actually kind of distasteful and takes me away from my friendships and family and my work in ways that are distracting and don't bring wealth to my life. And I mean that in all senses. Yeah. And my being sexual has very little to do with bodies and nudity. I so rarely engage in sex, and I have never been happier. And that's so weird for people because they don't get that. But that is I still miss stripping, and I still feel like there were things undone and stones left unturned on that path. I mean, I could be a stripper and not have to have sex with people, for any reason ever. I mean, human beings are much more complicated and they have layers to them, and that's why identity politics, I mean, it exists and it's a very real thing, and I understand why it exists. But, and identities do exist, groups and collectives do exist, and so do individuals. And having to live both as an individual and then members of several groups, and some of us try so hard to escape from certain groups because we don't want labels, or we don't want baggage, and we don't want people to make assumptions about our politics or where we came from. And one of the strangest things, and I've been able to hide this really well. I don't know if any of my friends will hear this, but some people will hear this. And when I said I grew up a second-generation libertarian, people assumed I came from some kind of upper middle-class background, and I don't know why, because that's just not reality. And for me, libertarianism, it helped my father escape what probably would have been just a young life that would have been in and out of jail. For my mother, it really allowed her to realize some ambitions. Making money is a big thing for women. It's a beautiful thing for women. They love it. And this is not because I'm a free market douchebag.
It gives them freedom and independence and power.
Right. It's just like, that's why with some leftists, it's like I tried to do this on Shadowproof a little bit, but I'm trying to explain to leftists and progressives that
what's
the
Shadowproof?
objectivism, it's a really Shadowproof is a great new magazine. It came out of Fire Dog Lake, and they have a show called Around the Empire, and I highly recommend that podcast.
Okay.
With Joanne Leone and Dan Wright.
Cool.
It's because a lot of leftist women have asked me about, well, what about this thing with you and Ayn Rand and stuff? It's just, for these things, these were tools to get out of what would have been a shitty, impoverished life. And that, so for me, the libertarianism isn't about, I don't care about your Cato white paper and, any reason, I don't want to go to your Mises U thing or anything. I did all that already. Fine, whatever. That's all great. That's all great for a 12-year-old, okay? I'm a grown woman, and I'm not in libertarianism because I give it, because I want to see some high rail defeated. I don't care about any of that. It's actually about overcoming oppression. It's the overcoming of oppression, meaning, I live under a worldwide police state under which I'm technically responsible because I, quote, pay taxes to. I have money stolen from me. And I want liberation for myself. This my activism isn't about other people, it's about me. It's about overthrowing the shackles of authority. And the reason why I got so involved in the anti-war effort, like much, I mean, just as a total focus, was in 2005 and 2006, some really unfortunate things had happened. I had a rather unfortunate miscarriage that was a little later than it should have been, and my grandmother died. And that's when I decided that, I mean, I already was anti-war. We're already in the mid part of, the height of the Iraq War, but it changed me in such a fundamental way, those events, that I decided that war and empire were going to be my focus. So those losses, both very traumatic for me. Though the miscarriage loss was traumatic for reasons that were, horribly distasteful, and it took me 10 years to get over until I could finally write about it as fiction. Those two events and all the things surrounding them are why I do the day job I do, and why I have such strong emotional feelings. And because I'm not a very emotional person anymore, my body and mind are changing through time, because I do feel like I'm growing and changing through time. But the whole of libertarianism, what is the thing that the state does that is the worst thing? And it kills children. It kills grandmothers. And I mean, one of the things that just hit me, I so rarely get emotional about it, but sometimes it hit me. Like, there's this Pakistani school principal talking about the night his mother was killed by a drone strike, and his mother was a midwife, was a town's midwife, the only midwife, and the grandmother to his children, and the screaming and crying of his children every night because they're so horribly screwed up from losing their grandmother this way. And that's why I do what I do, and where I focus, about grandmothers and children.
It's about other people's pain, right?
So that's why I'm here where I am. My grandmother was such a profoundly important person to me, and she was not a particularly good mother to my mother. My mother talks about that honestly now, but in a way that we can all be, loving and respectful toward. But she was an amazing grandmother and a wonderful, thinker and role model, and she made me think about everything from, corporations to Palestine. And she had so many ideas that I didn't realize were just really, truly brilliant, and someone who just had not had very much formal education, how she saw the world, and her commitment to things like organic gardening, that was so important. Losing that pregnancy, I was not able to get adequate medical treatment during the miscarriage. I unfortunately did not have a cell phone. I just moved to Los Angeles, and I was in the apartment my then husband and I were moving into, and his friends were helping move, and that was the only day they could be in town. And I began hemorrhaging and feeling the kind of pain that I would have asked you to knock me out of my misery for. And I begged him to call an ambulance or take me to the hospital immediately. I have to go. And he said, well, you can have some cab money. And at that point, pretty much the person that I had been the 30 years prior just was dead and died with that. And I spent about 9 hours in the fetal position while people just moved around me, screaming, bleeding, and crying. The screamings weren't too loud. And that, when 2 days later, when I had to go to the gynecologist, OGBON, who was an African-American doctor, and this is there's a key here to this. After the emergency surgery he gave me, he's one of the top gynecologists here in LA at the time, he now teaches at Yale. After all the emergency surgery was done 2 days later, and the things had to be put back in, and he called me into his office, not into the examining room, but into his office with his nurse practitioner, and they asked me to sit down and asked me why I didn't go to the emergency room. And my answer was I didn't want to be a bother. And they looked at me, I guess with a bit of pity and contempt, because they had known something not good had happened here and that I was lying. And that was the beginning, too, of becoming someone else, because domestic violence makes you a liar about your reality, because you can't tell the truth about who you are. And a lot of people, I mean, I love the child free by choice movement, and a lot of people think that's where I'm from, and I do identify with that. But I cannot continue. Like, I cannot pass down to my granddaughter, what came to me from my grandmother and mother. And that's it. That chain ends with me. So in the past few years, I have totally disregarded the shackles of that kind of Christina Hoff Sommers feminist bullshit that I fell through, or egalitarian bullshit, or independent women's forum, or white feminism, or any goddamn thing that anything Gloria Steinem and those garbage No, it's so far beyond that. And the intersections hit me, and seeing other people's intersections from different experiences, especially from dancing, meeting so many different kinds of women, that the past couple of years of my life have been about women. And women's success, and protecting women, and having good, healthy relationships with other women, platonically. And women, especially in anarchism and libertarianism, because it's different to be, it's a different identity. And I don't care about whether my libertarian female friends are constitutionalists or anarchists or Cato interns or whatnot. I just want to protect anarchist girls and women from all the other kinds of oppression that can occur in life. And the government, the United States government, is that patriarchal structure that recreates everything. And admitting what had happened to me during my marriage, one young girl from the Free State Project says, "Well, I thought you were so strong, and you're being a hypocrite because you helped me get away from my abusive parents." I said, I know. And that's it. So it's the war and it's women. And if you Google, and this is before this all kind of occurred to me, but back in 2012, I got interviewed by the Daily Bell, which is writing, and basically you write the interview. They send you questions and you write. If you Google Angela Keaton and Daily Bell, it gives you kind of a bio and my life story kind of condensed, but explains about how I think about the empire and how I think about women. But to me, the United States government is the most oppressive patriarchal structure the world has ever known. And it has a presence in 137 countries. I mean, that's according to, I think, Nick Turris's numbers. The numbers are different all the time depending on who I ask. But yeah, it's just, I want to be able to say that I did my part to defeat it when it mattered. And one of the hardest things I ever had to do with my life was when I was married, live with my then husband, who was writing a very important book, a book that's very important to me, because all the other identities that one can have mostly are assigned to one, but the one identity I chose for myself, that I picked, being a libertarian, did not have a story and did not have a history. It was so important to me that that book get written, and it was so important to me that I do what was good for libertarianism and the libertarian movement, that I stayed in a situation that profoundly rearranged my mind. And since then, the past few years have been about becoming a real adult, becoming not just an adult and fully functioning, but I mean someone who's ethical, someone who's rational, someone who's reasonable, someone who takes into the consideration of others. I think I was evolving into a good person, maybe 17 years ago or so, but I was not a very good person when I discovered the man I married, and I stopped being a jerk not long after that. And being in that marriage made me a lesser person. And we can go back to Ayn Rand, and she says, show me who a man loves, and I'll tell you who he is. And that's been the central key, those events in my life, and have been the key to who I am now. And that's a much more complex person than merely just a activist. 'Cause I'm not. I finally have only now really started to become who I am, like a real person. And it's taken me this struggle to get there. And I just see the oppressive structures everywhere, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or whoever. I don't care who runs them, but I just see those. And living under oppression does not make you a good person. It might make you a scrappy person. Some good people come out of oppression. People all the time do, but most suffering is unnecessary. And I would rather have learned to become a good person in other ways than as opposed to being tortured or ridiculed or threatened. And I have had such unfortunate relationships in the libertarian movement. When I say relationships, the men I have interacted with politically have been so damaging and so vicious over the years, and that it's profoundly changed the way I've looked at libertarianism. I don't particularly admire many of the heads of institutions, and even the people at the top, and even the men that I do speak to and am friendly with. I can only see their dysfunctionalities or their addictions. I don't find that the men in the libertarian movement who have any real success, or celebritarianism, as I would call it, they are not the kind of people morally or ethically who could live in an anarchist society. They are not ready for anarchism. They are not ready for Ancapistan. And I know I'm ready to live there if necessary, but they do not have, I know very few men in the libertarian movement who have the kind of morally developed consciousness, who are able to keep functioning friendships, who can keep their families intact. I mean, it's just disaster after disaster. But the way they treat women who have ideas and who are truly anarchist or truly libertarian, or who've challenged any of the power structures of the libertarian movement, which is highly right wing. I've just had horrible experiences with libertarian men as an adult, and it feels like it's such a slap on the face to why libertarianism was such an important thing to my family and what it meant, that I've had to reject all of classical liberalism and let go of the concept of the West, and let go of modernity and scientism. I've had to let that go. It just, those things have not served me well at all. And I think about this because everyone does Thomas Jefferson memes. Why black women might not like that. And I think about the Sally Hemings story and thinking about what that was, and that in our society, it's perfectly okay to have a man who rapes a teenage girl and gets her pregnant frequently as a role model, as an ideal, as a time when society was good, the good old days. That was not the good old days. Who the hell were those the good old days for? So my libertarianism and anarchism has profoundly changed because of my life experiences.
Mm-hmm. So you said that it's possible to leave one's oppression, and I'm wondering if you have left your oppression?
I've definitely gotten a lot of shackles off.
And you also talked about letting go of things, like you talked about the West and scientism and the mind-body duality, whatever. Sally Hemings couldn't just let go of her master.
Right.
But it sounds like maybe you can let go, or maybe you already have let go of some of your oppressors.
Yes. And
maybe that's what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Just letting go.
Right.
Because are you in a position to do that? Are you in a position to let go?
This interview is so grueling because I never really talked about any of these things before. I mean, I've talked in bits and pieces, but I've only started talking about them recently to people, like in the past year or so. Because there have been questions at work about my libertarianism. There were questions about whether I was heading toward being pro-violence. And my views on these things are complicated. I am personally pretty close to a pacifist, but I do entirely understand why people, this is very difficult in the libertarian movement to really talk about, because this is, but I've always the underlying part of me felt this way, that it is reasonable and rational for oppressed groups to strike back at their oppressors with violence, with destruction. That's not how I want to do things for me as an individual, but I am not sitting here in judgment about that. So there's new conflicts maybe in my headspace now.
There's certainly things you can free yourself from. You can let go of. You can let go of particular people, right? Because they're not your slave masters. You can let go of particular ideologies, like libertarianism or some variants of libertarianism. It seems like, there are particular people who are attached to particular ideologies who have been your oppressors for a very, very, very long time. And it seems like you can let go of at least those people and those ideas. Is that right?
And doing that as of late has caused a little bit of conversation in the movement.
Yeah, I bet. Well,
and with people I work with and no longer work with and do and don't.
Well, I'm on your side. Libertarians love this sociology book by Arnold Hirschman called Voice and Exit. Voice is democracy and participating and, making change through participation in the political process. And exit, I love, is just leaving, as you were talking about. Just leave. Just go somewhere else. It seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, I think we did it. I think we did it. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, that's out there.
Yeah. No, I think you'll have some new friends from this. Some new allies. There's a word for you.
Yeah, allies.
Yeah, I think so. I think it will also cause people to think twice about some things too. So that's good for themselves. Well, thanks for doing this.
Thanks.
This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. If you want to become a supporting member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredunderground.com. To register for the live webinar on Post-Modernism on November 2nd, or for the special weekend with me in Los Angeles from November 10th to the 12th, go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses. Thanks for listening.